Imagine this. A bright, successful black man, dressed in a sharp suit, pulls up to his local bank. His name? James Carter. Little did he know that his visit to the bank that morning would ignite a series of events that would shake the community, expose deeply ingrained racism, and turn the world's attention to police brutality and racial profiling in a way no one could have anticipated. What happened next wasn't just shocking, it was unbelievable. How could something so blatantly wrong happen in broad daylight in 2024? James Carter, a high-profile FBI agent, had a stellar reputation. He wasn't just any man off the street. He had taken down drug rings, solved complex federal cases, and protected his country. Yet none of that mattered when he approached those cold glass doors of the bank. All the prestige, all the success meant nothing in the eyes of a racist bank manager and a few overzealous police officers. Now, stop for a moment and think. What would you do if you were in his shoes? Could you stay calm when faced with blatant injustice? What would your reaction be if someone judged you, not by your accomplishments, but by the color of your skin? James's morning started like any other. He had some checks to deposit, a routine task he'd done 100 times before. But as soon as he stepped out of his sleek black sedan, the tension in the air was palpable. Standing in front of the bank's doors was Gerald Thompson, the bank manager. His face twisted into a look of disdain, his eyes narrowing on James as if his very presence was an affront. "Can I help you?" Gerald's tone was sharp, cold. James, confused by the hostility but keeping his composure, replied politely, "I'm here to make a deposit." What came next would send chills down anyone's spine. "I don't think so," Gerald sneered, crossing his arms defiantly. "We don't want your kind here." "Your kind." Those words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. James felt a flash of anger, but he kept his calm. After all, he had dealt with far worse in his career. But still, in 2024, in a world that claimed progress, here was a man bold enough to throw racial slurs in his face. James narrowed his eyes. "I've been a customer here for years. What are you talking about?" But Gerald wasn't interested in logic. He stepped closer to James, blocking his way into the bank. "You don't belong here," he said. "We don't want any trouble, so I suggest you turn around and leave." Let's pause for a second. What would you do in this situation? Would you walk away, knowing you were being targeted because of your race, or would you stand your ground? Share your thoughts in the comments below. James, calm but refusing to back down, said firmly, "I have accounts here. I'm not going anywhere." Gerald's eyes flickered with annoyance, but instead of stepping aside, he pulled out his phone. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops. You look like trouble." Trouble? James hadn't a single thing wrong. He wasn't raising his voice, wasn't causing a scene. All he wanted to do was handle his business like any other customer. But in the eyes of this racist manager, being a black man at a bank was enough to call the police. James tried again, his patience wearing thin. "You're making a mistake." But Gerald was already dialing 911, describing James as a suspicious man trying to enter the bank. Moments later, flashing blue and red lights appeared down the street. The police arrived swiftly, 2 officers stepping out of their cruiser, eyeing James as if he were some criminal. The lead officer, Officer Daniels, locked eyes with James, and you could already tell this wasn't going to end well. "Is this the man causing trouble?" Daniels asked Gerald, who was all too eager to play the victim. "Yes, officer," Gerald said, puffing up his chest. He refused to leave when asked. "I'm afraid he's here to rob us or worse." Rob them? The sheer absurdity of the accusation hung in the air. James, in his expensive suit, holding his briefcase with checks to deposit, was now being framed as a threat. He couldn't believe it. "Sir, I need you to step back," Daniels ordered James, his hand inching toward his holster. James saw the tension in the officer's eyes, the preconceived judgment. Daniels didn't care who James was or why he was there. He saw only one thing: a black man who must be up to no good. James remained calm, but there was a fire burning inside him. "I'm an FBI agent," he said slowly, carefully, trying to defuse the situation. He reached into his jacket to pull out his credentials, but that only made the officers more agitated. "Hands where I can see them," Daniels barked, stepping closer, hand now fully gripping his weapon. The other officer flanked James, eyes wide with anticipation, as if they were waiting for the slightest excuse to act. "Wait," James said, raising his hand slightly. "I'm not resisting. I'm trying to show you my ID." But it was too late. Daniels was already pushing him to the ground. "Stop resisting," the officer yelled, though James hadn't moved. The crowd that had gathered gasped in horror. Phones came out, recording the shocking sight of James, a respected FBI agent, being forcibly handcuffed and thrown into the back of the police cruiser. Do you think this was justified? Was there any reason for the police to treat James like this, knowing he hadn't done a thing wrong? Let me know what you think in the comments. As the sirens faded, the crowd that had gathered posted their videos online. Within hours, the internet exploded. The hashtag JusticeForJames took over social media, and soon the world knew what had happened. A black man, an FBI agent no less, had been targeted, humiliated, and violently arrested because of a racist bank manager's prejudice. But this story was far from over. While James sat in a holding cell, processing the sheer insanity of the day's events, the world outside was rallying behind him. Protests broke out in front of the bank, demanding answers. Civil rights activists, celebrities, and politicians alike voiced their outrage. How could something like this happen in broad daylight? And what would be done to make sure it never happened again? Now, let's talk about consequences. What should happen to police officers who wrongly arrest someone based on racial profiling? Should they be fired immediately, or is there a more effective way to hold them accountable? Share your views in the comments. The footage of the arrest quickly made its way to James's FBI colleagues, and they were livid. Here was one of their top agents, treated like a common criminal, simply for trying to deposit checks at a bank. James's bosses wasted no time. His immediate release was ordered, and a formal complaint was filed against the officers involved. But things were just heating up. When the police department was asked to comment on the incident, they initially tried to downplay the situation. Officer Daniels, when confronted with the footage of what he'd done, shrugged it off. He looked suspicious. "I was just doing my job," Daniels said, with no sign of remorse. No remorse. Think about that. A man's dignity had been shattered, his rights violated, and the officer who did it saw no problem with it. Is this the kind of mindset we need in law enforcement? What should be done to officers who can't see the harm in their actions? However, Daniels' arrogance would be his undoing. Public outcry grew louder, and as more details emerged about James's impeccable record as an FBI agent, the calls for justice reached a boiling point. Under mounting pressure, the police department launched a full investigation. Officer Daniels and his partner were suspended without pay, pending the outcome. Meanwhile, James wasn't content to simply walk away from the situation. He knew this wasn't just about him. This was about every black person who had been unfairly targeted, every individual who had been profiled or brutalized by a system that saw them as less than. So James decided to fight back in the most dramatic way possible. Here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. James decided to buy the bank. That's right, the very bank that had treated him like a criminal was now within his reach. James was wealthy, successful, and had connections. After consulting with his lawyers and financial advisors, he made the bold move to purchase the bank. The deal was done quietly, without the bank even realizing who their new owner would be. Can you imagine the shock on Gerald Thompson's face when James walked back into the bank, not as a customer, but as the new boss? Picture this: James, calm and collected, strolling into the bank's main office. Gerald, completely oblivious, greeted him with the same sneer he had the first time. "What are you doing here?" Gerald asked, still believing he held all the power. James looked him straight in the eye and said, "I own this bank now." Gerald's face went pale. "What? How?" His words trailed off, the realization hitting him like a freight train. But James wasn't there just to make a point. He was there to clean house. "You're fired," he said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering, effective immediately. Gerald stammered, trying to salvage his dignity. "You can't do this." "Oh, but I can," James replied smoothly, "and I just did." Gerald's face twisted in disbelief. This was the same man he had humiliated just days ago, the man he had called the police on, now his boss? The weight of his actions crashed down on him, and he knew there was no escape. The once smug bank manager, who had reveled in his authority, was now reduced to a man begging for mercy. "Please, I didn't mean anything by it," Gerald stammered, his arrogance gone. I was just doing my job. It's policy, you know? James held up a hand, cutting him off. Your policy was racist, and you called the cops on me for no reason. You humiliated me in front of a crowd, endangered my life by having me arrested, and you did it because of the color of my skin. You're not just fired, Gerald, you're done. The room was dead silent, with the rest of the staff watching in stunned disbelief. James's calm but commanding demeanor left no room for argument. Gerald, now realizing the gravity of the situation, tried one last desperate plea, but it was no use. Security escorted him out of the building, his face red with shame. And just like that, in a matter of minutes, James had not only fired the racist bank manager, but also turned the tables on the entire institution that had once disrespected him. But James wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. He gathered the bank staff together for a meeting, and what he said next would send ripples throughout the community and beyond.